We use the expression, how are you, in English in so many situations. How are you doing? What can I get you started with? Or how are you doing? Long time no see, man. Or how are you doing? Cash or credit? We can use how are you doing just with anyone, strangers or friends, just kind of like as a general greeting in English. But in Korean, this sort of usage is very awkward. Now, Korean has two common expressions for asking someone how they're doing. 어떻게 지내세요? Or this could also be 지내요 or just 지내. And this literally means how are you doing? Another common phrase is 잘 지내세요. Are you doing okay? And you can use them to ask people how they're doing. So then what's the problem? Well, these phrases actually aren't as common as other phrases in Korean. And you can use these with people who you're acquainted with, but using either of these phrases with strangers or even just anyone who you're not already acquainted with will sound very awkward in Korean. So again, you can use these with close acquaintances or even business acquaintances, but not with strangers. To understand this sort of awkward feeling for yourself, imagine that instead of saying, how are you doing, you asked, how have you been, to a stranger. It makes sense, but it sounds awkward. So then how should you say, how are you doing, to people? Well, it's very simple and you already know how to say this. For your close friends, 안녕, and everyone else, 안녕하세요. Yes, that's really all that you need to say. Because when you're asking someone, how are you doing, and they say, good, you? Do they really mean good? No, it's just a general greeting. It's just something that you say to people. So the most basic way is to just say, hi. If, of course, you want to be extra fancy, well, then you also have this phrase, 안녕하십니까. And this kind of has the feeling of, hello, ladies and gentlemen, that sort of fancy business feeling. But let's talk about some other options for greeting people, because this isn't the only one. After the Korean War, Korea was very poor, food was scarce, so a common greeting in Korea became, have you eaten? And it's still used today, just kind of like a, hey, how are you doing? Have you eaten? 밥 먹었어요? Or with your close friends, 밥 먹었어? Another thing is that older people tend to use phrases that have 식사하다 in them more than 밥 먹다. So there might be some variations on this as well, like an older person could say to their friend, 식사했어. But if you're using it to an older person, then you want to, of course, be polite, 식사하셨어요. Could you imagine if every time you asked one of these phrases, you had to like treat them? There are actually a lot of expressions in Korean that have to do with eating or food, and I'll actually link two videos in the description of this video that I like, which teach some of the most common expressions that have to do with food. However, you still wouldn't ask, have you eaten, to a stranger? Then how would you say, how are you doing, to a stranger? Well, again, it just goes back to 안녕하세요. You simply say hello, and that conveys everything that you would want to say in English when you really ask someone, how you doing? Hello, 안녕하세요. That is good enough. You don't need any other special phrase to say how are you doing with a stranger. So are there any other ways that you can think of how to say how are you doing in Korean with friends or strangers? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time. 그럼 다음에 또 봐.